Welcome to Craftlit, the podcast for crafters who love books. My name is Heather Ordover, and I'm podcasting from where the Delaware River meets the Old York Road, New Hope, Pennsylvania. Episode 505, Dunning, Meet Kruger. This episode of Craftlit is brought to you by its listeners. Many thanks and much gratefulness to all of the listeners who have gone over to patreon.com/craftlit and pledged their support to the show. We couldn't do it without you. Thank you. Well, hello. How are you? I am well. I have learned a lot about ships this week, and I'm not even going to cover half of it. We will pick it up as we go along, just like Jim. But we do have some really fun characterization work going on in this chapter, because we will meet one of the most famous characters in literature ever, I think. I think it's fair to say there's a particular peg-legged person who has become the platonic ideal of a pirate. When one thinks of a pirate, one thinks Long John Silver. Or if you know more about pirates, maybe you think about Edward England or Blackbeard or someone like that. But for us, it's all about Long John. And today, you get to meet him. But first, the only craftiness I got up to this week was trying to make bread, which, if you've been listening for a long time, you know means I had to try and make gluten-free bread. I used recipes that I have used many, many times before. I have never had this happen. What happened is following the recipe, double checking the recipe, making sure, because gluten-free baking is not like normal stuff. Both tries, the bread came out like batter instead of like dough. Now, was it humid outside? Not particularly. In fact, the weather was really lovely. Was it particularly dry outside? No, you could still tell that there was moisture in the air. I have no explanation. It was like water was more wet than usual. And I wound up with bread batter, which I finally, in desperation, just poured into a bread pan. And it's fine, but it wasn't what I expected or should have gotten. Has this happened to you before, especially with making bread? I know nothing. If you know something about this, please share. You can either mail heather@craftlit.com or you can call 206-350-1642 and share your wisdom with everybody. Aside from that, it was a week of getting back to work after being on vacation, which, as we know, can be a bit challenging. But made it through. Mom's still here. We had some fun. We went on a bit of an adventure yesterday and found a place that up here that's really, it's a great idea. I think it's relatively new. It's a former quarry, no longer used, that has been, well, actually, I don't know, filled or allowed to fill with water. It's certainly been unused for a while because there are trees growing up from the bottom of what would have been the quarry bed. But now it is a lake, basically. And we went for a bit of a vondel on the pod, and it was really quite lovely. There are people who brought kayaks with them. We do not have kayaks. If we had, we would have used them because it was beautifully glassy and calm water. A couple of guys were fishing. It was very pleasant. So we got up early, went and had brunch, went and looked at the quarry, and then I went home and failed at making bread. There it is. But while failing, I listened to Treasure Island. A couple of things to know as we head into this chapter. Talked about this before on the podcast, that Bertolt Brecht, the German playwright who wrote Mother Courage and The Good Woman of Szechuan and wrote the book for the Threepenny Opera, he had a theory, which is largely understood incorrectly. It's misunderstood certainly by Americans most of the time. And the idea was this: if you do something to tell your audience what is coming, it doesn't ruin it for them. It makes them pay attention, perhaps better than they would have otherwise. So an example, a modern example, My son, last year before ninth grade, one of the books on the reading list was called They Both Die in the End. This is a young adult book. And he read it and said it was spectacular. So I listened to it early on last year. So it would probably been September, October. I listened to it on my commute. And I have never read a book like this. I mean, the guy tells you up front in the title what is going to happen. And absolutely all of the way through the book, I kept saying, nope, not going to happen. Not going to happen like that. It's going to play out differently. Oh no. And that was spectacular because, of course, you're paying very close attention to everything that happens, hoping that the inevitable won't ever arrive. It's spectacular. They Both Die in the End by Adam Silvera. Link in the show notes. You're welcome. But I bring that up because there's no way for us to escape the fact that we have heard the name Long John Silver before. And it would be very easy to think, oh, we're not going to be able to read it or listen to it the way that Robert Louis Stevenson intended, because we've already gotten to the punchline. We already know who this guy is. And so it just isn't going to work as well because all of the suspense part is invariably going to not be available to us. And I suppose that's true in some ways, but I think the way that it's true is a very small way. Because when we are introduced to Long John Silver in the book, as we will be today in chapter 8, we are introduced to him as a tavern owner and the man who will become the ship's cook. That's it. He's not a pirate. He's a businessman who lost his leg in service to the country. And that's it. He's kind of charming and likable. And that makes him really interesting to watch. Because for us, the big reveal is going to be, when does everybody else figure out who he really is? And for us, if we haven't read the book before, the other big question is, okay, so we know he's a pirate, and he's charming, and he's smart. He looks like a fun guy to hang out with. All of that said, is that really who he is? And the piracy thing just happens to be kind of tangential to his actual personality, to his soul, who he is deep down inside. We don't know, but that is certainly something that will be interesting for us to watch as the book goes on. Now, we talked way back at the first chapter about Jim being a largely trustworthy narrator. And we have to remember that Jim is writing this down from his memory. So after the voyage, after the adventure that we're about to go on, which means he has the opportunity to make commentary on his own behavior and other people's behavior as well. So you're going to hear some of that today. He will let you know when he has recognized him not reading a situation perhaps quite so well. And that is where the Dunning-Kruger effect comes in. We know that Squire Trelawney is not the sharpest knife in the drawer. I think it is fair to say that in today's 2 chapters, we see laid bare in front of us what is, in fact, the Dunning-Kruger effect. There were 2 researchers who released a paper in 1999 talking about how the people who are the least competent at what they do, the fact that they are the least competent means they don't actually have the skill set and the knowledge to recognize their incompetence. However, because they don't have the skill set to recognize their incompetence, they can't judge their competence accurately and invariably rate themselves ridiculously high, to the point where I'm going to share some statistics with you. And I link out to this article from the show notes as well, so you can read a little more if you're interested. Cornell undergrads took a 20-item grammar test. The students who scored in the 10th percentile, so they scored higher than only 10% of the others, 90%, everybody else scored higher than them. They rated their grammar abilities in the 67th percentile. So they were really bad at grammar, but they thought they were in the top third. This also happens outside of universities. There's a high-tech firm found that somewhere between 32 and 42% of software engineers rated their skills as being in the top 5%, which isn't possible. 21% of Americans believe that it's very likely or fairly likely that they'll become millionaires within the next 10 years. Drivers consistently rate themselves above average. And then there was a study of the faculty at the University of Nebraska. This is no slight on the University of Nebraska. I'm sure this would happen everywhere. 68% rated themselves in the top 25% for teaching ability. And more than 90% rated themselves as being above average, which isn't possible. Now, it's not a totally helpless thing. This is not a state that we have to stay in, because if you are given direct, clear, available for study feedback, you can learn that you don't know enough and therefore learn what you need to learn. But it requires somebody being able to crack through the thick skull and demonstrate, show, explain that you don't know what you think you know. It's only when we hit that point that we can learn and grow. And as the author of this article says, Confucius said, real knowledge is to know the extent of one's ignorance. Wisdom for the ages. We are going to watch a gentleman named Trelawney demonstrate the Dunning-Kruger effect. Sometimes it's funny, sometimes it's heartbreaking, and sometimes it's terrifying. We are also going to see what it's like for the person who actually does know what they're doing to have to work for somebody who doesn't. And the, dripping off the page, the scorn in the voice of the person who is competent, talking to the person who is incompetent. It is audible. It is just so clear. And I have this sneaking suspicion that in today's day and age, you would hear Squire Trelawney calling somebody else elitist, which would be very funny for all sorts of reasons. But that's something to watch today, just because it's really, really well done. Robert Louis Stevenson does a great job. Other things to watch out for. There's a reference to a fable, The Mountain and the Mouse. This is a fairly simple, like a 4-line fable that Aesop had collected with all of the other ones. And the fable goes like this. Once upon a time, there was a mountain, and the mountain started to make the most incredible noise. It shook, it moaned, it was all over the place, and lo and behold, it gave birth to a mouse. A crack appears in the side of the mountain, and a mouse runs out. This is a tempest in a teapot. This is a lot of noise and no result. You will hear Dr. Livesey bring up the mountain and the mouse. Sometimes it's referred to as the mountain in labor, but it's the same story. The other thing is you're going to hear a reference to a brass swivel. This is a swivel gun. They were small, lightweight, highly maneuverable. They didn't really often shoot things like balls, but they certainly could shoot small metallic objects at other ships, which would, do damage because you're on the water. There are lots of references to ship's architecture, and I've linked out to, I've added a couple of pictures, and I've linked out to at least one page that has some information on ship's architecture from this time. The important thing for you to know is this. The crew does not sleep in a cabin. The crew may sleep in a part of the ship called the forecastle or the forecastle, and that would be the area that has hammocks, most likely. Sometimes it was kind of on the deck of the ship, sometimes it was below, but it was always near the front. Aft of the ship, towards the back, there's the stern. The stern is the entire back end of the ship. That is where the cabin is. So when you hear a reference to the cabin, it means the captain's quarters. So that would be where the captain, the first mate, the cabin boy, a doctor, if there's a doctor on board, all of them would have smallish cabins. And then the captain would have basically that whole last chunk of the boat for office, his living quarters, and sometimes adjoining that, he would have a dining room or a galley. That would be the captain's galley. Where the cook worked, the kitchen area, such as it would be, that was often amidships. That was kind of in the middle. I found a lot of references about whether or not a ship's cook would ever have cooked up on the deck or somewhere more well ventilated. it was a little hard to get information on that. So if you have information, please feel free to share. 206-350-1642. And on that phone number note, I believe you can now get the phone number even more easily from within the app and from any players that accept extra metadata and information. I just updated it this morning, so I haven't tested it out yet. I'm waiting for everything to auto-populate. But that should be an easier number to dial nowadays. And there is a survey. If you have never taken a Craftlit survey from Libsyn.com, there's a link in the show notes. It's survey.libsyn.com/craftlit. That just helps Libsyn, the company that hosts our feed, know who listens to the show to make sure that they are targeting the show in the right way and in the right categories as Craftlit moves ahead through the ages. I think that's everything you need before we start. So let's listen to some dumb people being dumb, and let's feel superior. There's so few places where anyone encourages you to feel superior and smug, and I'm going to say, just go for it. Just feel really smug during today's chapters. It'll be fun, and we may not be able to feel that way for much longer, but that's fine. For this one brief moment, enjoy your superiority. All right, here we go with chapters 8 and 9 of Treasure Island by Robert Louis Stevenson.
Chapter 8, At the Sign of the Spyglass. When I had done breakfasting, the squire gave me a note addressed to John Silver at the Sign of the Spyglass, and he told me I should easily find the place by following the line of the docks and keeping a bright lookout for a little tavern with a large brass telescope for a sign. I set off, overjoyed at this opportunity to see some more of the ships and seamen, and picked my way among a great crowd of people and carts and bales, for the dock was now at its busiest, until I found the tavern in question. It was a bright enough little place of entertainment. The sign was newly painted, the windows had neat red curtains, the floor was cleanly sanded. There was a street on either side, and an open door on both, which made the large low room pretty clear to see in spite of clouds of tobacco smoke. The customers were mostly seafaring men, and they talked so loudly that I hung at the door, almost afraid to enter. As I was waiting, a man came out of a side room, and at a glance I was sure he must be Long John. His leg was cut off close by the hip, and under the left shoulder he carried a crutch, which he managed with a wonderful dexterity, hopping about upon it like a bird. He was very tall and strong, with a face as big as a ham, plain and pale, but intelligent and smiling. Indeed, he seemed in the most cheerful spirits, whistling as he moved about among the tables, with a merry word or a slap on the shoulder for the more favoured of his guests. Now, to tell you the truth, from the very first mention of Long John in Squire Trelawney's letter, I had taken a fear in my mind that he might prove to be the very one-legged sailor whom I had watched for so long at the old Benbow. But one look at the man before me was enough. I had seen the captain, and Black Dog, and the blind man Pugh, and I thought I knew what a buccaneer was like. A very different creature, according to me, from this clean and pleasant-tempered landlord. I plucked up courage at once, crossed the threshold, and walked right up to the man where he stood, propped on his crutch, talking to a customer. "Mr. Silver, sir?" I asked, holding out the note. "Yes, my lad," said he, "such is my name, to be sure. And who may you be?" And when he saw the squire's letter, he seemed to me to give something almost like a start. "Oh," said he quite aloud, and offering his hand, "I see. You are a new cabin boy. Pleased I am to see you." And he took my hand in his large firm grasp. Just then one of the customers at the far side rose suddenly and made for the door. It was close by him, and he was out in the street in a moment. But his hurry had attracted my notice, and I recognized him at a glance. It was the tallow-faced man wanting 2 fingers who had come first to the Admiral Benbow. "Oh," I cried, "stop him! It's Black Dog." "I don't care 2 coppers who he is," cried Silver, "but he hasn't paid his score. Harry, run and catch him." One of the others, who was nearest the door, leapt up and started in pursuit. "If he were Admiral Hawke he shall pay his score," said Silver, and then, relinquishing my hand, "Who did you say he was?" he asked. "Black what?" "Black Dog," said I. "Has Mr. Trelawney not told you of the Buccaneers? He was one of them." "So?" cried Silver. "In my house? Ben, run and help Harry. One of those swabs, was he? Was that you drinking with him, Morgan? Step up here." The man whom he called Morgan, an old grey-haired, mahogany-faced sailor, came forward pretty sheepishly, rolling his quid. "Now, Morgan," said Long John very sternly, "you never clapped your eyes on that black dog before, did you now?" "Not I, sir," said Morgan with a salute. "You didn't know his name, did you?" "No, sir." "By the powers, Tom Morgan, it's good for you," exclaimed the landlord. "If you had been mixed up with the like of that, you would never have put another foot in my house, you may lay to that. And what was he saying to you?" "I don't rightly know, sir," answered Morgan. "Do you call that a head on your shoulders or a blessed dead-eye?" cried Long John. "Don't rightly know, don't you? Perhaps you don't happen to rightly know who you were speaking to, perhaps? Come now, what was he jawing? Voyages, captain, ships? Pipe up, what was it?" "We was a-talking of keel-hauling," answered Morgan. "Keel-hauling, was you? And a mighty suitable thing too, and you may lay to that. Get back to your place for a lubber, Tom." And then, as Morgan rolled back to his seat, Silver added to me in a confidential whisper that was very flattering, as I thought, "He's quite an honest man, Tom Morgan, only stupid. And now," he ran on again loud, "let's see, Black Dog? No, I don't know that name, not I. Yet I kind of think, yes, I've seen the swab. He used to come here with a blowing beggar, he used." "That he did, you may be sure," said I. "I knew that blind man too. His name was Pugh." "It was!" cried Silver, now quite excited. "Pugh! That was his name for certain. Ah, he looked a shark, he did. And if we run down this Black Dog now, there'll be news for Captain Trelawney. Ben's a good runner. Few seamen run better than Ben. He should have run him down hand over hand, by the powers. He talked of keel-hauling, did he? I'll keel-haul him." All the time he was jerking out these phrases he was stumping up and down the tavern on his crutch, slapping tables with his hand, and giving such a show of excitement as would have convinced an Old Bailey judge or a Bow Street runner. My suspicions had been thoroughly reawakened on finding Black Dog at the spyglass, and I watched the cook narrowly. But he was too deep and too ready and too clever for me, and by the time the 2 men had come back out of breath and confessed that they had lost the track in a crowd and been scolded like thieves, I would have gone bail for the innocence of Long John Silver. "Now see here, Hawkins," said he, "here's a blessed hard thing on a man like me now, ain't it? There's Captain Trelawney. What's he to think? Here I have this confounded son of a Dutchman sitting here in my own house, drinking of my own rum. Here you comes and tells me of it plain, and here I let him give us all the slip before my blessed deadlights. Now, Hawkins, you do me justice with the captain. You're a lad, you are, but you're as smart as paint. I see that when you first came in. Now, here it is. What could I do with this old timber I hobble on? When I was a A.B. Master Mariner, I'd have come alongside him hand over hand and broached him into a brace of old shakes, I would. And now—" And then all of a sudden he stopped, and his jaw dropped as though he had remembered something. "The score!" he burst out. 3 goes a rub! Why, shiver my timbers if I hadn't forgotten my score." And falling on a bench, he laughed till the tears ran down his cheeks. I could not help joining, and we laughed together, peal after peal, till the tavern rang again. "Why, what a precious old sea calf I am," he said at last, wiping his cheeks. "You and me should get on well, Hawkins, for I'll take my Davy I should be rated ship's boy. But come now, stand by to go about. This won't do. Duty is duty, messmates. I'll put on my old cocked hat and step along you to Captain Trelawney and report this here affair. For, mind you, it's serious, young Hawkins, and neither you nor me's come out of it with what I should make so bold as to call credit. No, you neither, says you. Not smart. None of the pair of us smart. But dash my buttons, that were a good 'un about my score." And he began to laugh again, and that so heartily that though I did not see the joke as he did, I was again obliged to join him in his mirth. On our little walk along the quays he made himself the most interesting companion, telling me about the different ships that we passed by, their rig, tonnage, nationality, explaining the work that was going forward, how one was discharging, another taking in cargo, and a third making ready for sea, and every now and then telling me some little anecdote of ships or seamen, or repeating a nautical phrase till I had learned it perfectly. I began to see that here was one of the best of possible shipmates. When we got to the inn, the squire and Dr. Livesey were seated together, finishing a quart of ale with a toast in it before they should go aboard the schooner on a visit of inspection. Long John told the story from first to last, with a great deal of spirit and the most perfect truth. "That was how it were now, weren't it, Hawkins?" he would say now and again, and I could always bear him entirely out. The 2 gentlemen regretted that Black Dog had got away, but we all agreed that there was nothing to be done, and after he had been complimented, Long John took up his crutch and departed. "All hands aboard for 4 this afternoon," shouted the squire after him. "Aye, aye, sir," cried the cook in the passage. "Well, squire," said Dr. Livesey, "I don't put much faith in your discoveries as a general thing, but I will say this. John Silver suits me." "That man's a perfect trump," declared the squire. "And now," added the doctor, "Jim may come on board with us, may he not?" "To be sure he may," said the squire. "Take your hat, Hawkins, and we'll see the ship." End of Chapter 8. Chapter 9. Powder and Arms. The Hispaniola lay some way out, and we went under the figureheads and around the sterns of many other ships, and their cables sometimes grated beneath our keel and sometimes swung above us. At last, however, we swung alongside, and were met and saluted as we stepped aboard by the mate, Mr. Arrow, a brown old sailor with earrings in his ears and a squint. He and the squire were very thick and friendly, but I soon observed that things were not the same between Mr. Trelawney and the captain. This last was a sharp-looking man who seemed angry with everything on board, and was soon to tell us why, for we had hardly got down into the cabin when a sailor followed us. "Captain Smollett, sir, axing to speak with you," said he. "I'm always at the captain's orders. Show him in," said the squire. The captain, who was close behind his messenger, entered at once and shut the door behind him. "Well, Captain Smollett, what have you to say? All well, I hope, all shipshape and seaworthy?" "Well, sir," said the captain, "better speak plain, I believe, at the risk of offence. I don't like this cruise. I don't like the men, and I don't like my officer. That's short and sweet." "Perhaps, sir, you don't like the ship?" inquired the squire, very angry, as I could see. "I can't speak to that, sir, not having seen her tried," said the captain. "She seems a clever craft. More I can't say." "Possibly, sir, you may not like your employer either," said the squire. But here Dr. Livesey cut in. "Stay a bit," said he. "Stay a bit. No use of such questions as that but to produce ill feeling. The captain has said too much, or he has said too little, and I'm bound to say that I require an explanation of his words. You don't, you say, like this cruise. Now why?" "I was engaged, sir, on what we call sealed orders, to sail this ship for that gentleman where he should bid me," said the captain. "So far, so good. But now I find that every man before the mast knows more than I do. I don't call that fair. Now, do you?" "No," said Dr. Livesey, "I don't." "Next," said the captain, "I learn that we are going after treasure. Hear it from my own hands, mind you. Now, treasure is ticklish work. I don't like treasure voyages on any account, and I don't like them above all when they are secret and when, begging your pardon, Mr. Trelawney, the secret has been told to the parrot." "Silver's parrot?" asked the squire. "It's a way of speaking," said the captain. "Blabbed, I mean. It's my belief neither of you gentlemen know what you are about, but I'll tell you my way of it, life or death, and a close run." "That is all clear, and I dare say true enough," replied Dr. Livesey. "We take the risk, but we are not so ignorant as you believe us. Next, you say you don't like the crew. Are they not good seamen?" "I don't like them, sir," returned Captain Smollett, "and I think I should have had the choosing of my own hands, if you go to that." "Perhaps you should," replied the doctor. "My friend should perhaps have taken you along with him, but the slight, if there be one, was unintentional. And you don't like Mr. Arrow?" "I don't, sir. I believe he's a good seaman, but he's too free with the crew to be a good officer. A mate should keep himself to himself, shouldn't drink with the men before the mast." "Do you mean he drinks?" cried the squire. "No, sir," replied the captain. "Only that he's too familiar." "Well now, and the short and the long of it, captain?" asked the doctor. "Tell us what you want." "Well, gentlemen, are you determined to go on this cruise?" "Like iron," answered the squire. "Very good," said the captain. "Then, as you've heard me very patiently saying things that I could not prove, hear me a few words more. They are putting the powder and arms in the forehold. Now, you have a good place under the cabin. Why not put them there? First point. Then you are bringing 4 of your own people with you, and they tell me some of them are to be berthed forward. Why not give them the berths here besides the cabin? Second point." "Any more?" asked Mr. Trelawney. "One more," said the captain. "There's been too much blabbing already." "Far too much," agreed the doctor. "I'll tell you what I have heard myself," continued Captain Smollett. "That you have a map of an island, that there's crosses on the map to show where treasure is, and that the island lies—" and then he named the latitude and longitude exactly. "I never told that," cried the squire, "to a soul." "The hands know it, sir," returned the captain. "Livesey, that must have been you or Hawkins," cried the squire. "It doesn't much matter who it was," replied the doctor, and I could see that neither he nor the captain paid much regard to Mr. Trelawney's protestations. Neither did I, to be sure. He was so loose a talker. Yet in this case I believe he was really right, and that nobody had told the situation of the island. "Well, gentlemen," continued the captain, "I don't know who has this map, but I make it a point it shall be kept secret even from me and Mr. Arrow. Otherwise, I would ask you to let me resign." "I see," said the doctor. You wish us to keep this matter dark, and to make a garrison of the stern part of the ship, manned with my friend's own people, and provided with all the arms and powder on board. In other words, you fear a mutiny. Sir, said Captain Smollett, with no intention to take offence, I deny your right to put words into my mouth. No captain, sir, would be justified in going to sea at all if he had ground enough to say that. As for Mr. Arrow, I believe him thoroughly honest. Some of the men are the same, all may be, for what I know, but I am responsible for the ship's safety and the life of every man jack aboard of her. I see things going, as I think, not quite right, and I ask you to take certain precautions, or let me resign my berth, and that's all. Captain Smollett, began the doctor with a smile, did you ever hear the fable of the mountain and the mouse? You'll excuse me, I dare say, but you remind me of that fable. When you came in here, I'll stake my wig you meant more than this. Doctor, said the captain, you are smart. When I came in here, I meant to get discharged. I had no thought that Mr. Trelawney would hear a word. No more I would, cried the squire. Had Livesey not been here, I should have seen you to the deuce. As it is, I have heard you. I will do as you desire, but I think the worst of you. That's as you please, sir, said the captain. You'll find I do my duty. And with that he took his leave. Trelawney, said the doctor, contrary to all my notions, I believe you have managed to get 2 honest men on board with you. That man and John Silver. Silver, if you like, cried the squire, but as for that intolerable humbug, I declare I think his conduct unmanly, unsailorly, and downright un-English. Well, said the doctor, we shall see. When we came on deck, the men had begun already to take out the arms and powder, yo-hoing at their work, while the captain and Mr. Arrow stood by superintending. The new arrangement was quite to my liking. The whole schooner had been overhauled. 6 berths had been made astern out of what had been the after part of the main hold, and this set of cabins was only joined to the galley and forecastle by a sparred passage on the port side. It had been originally meant that the captain, Mr. Arrow, Hunter, Joyce, the doctor and the squire were to occupy these 6 berths. Now Redruth and I were to get 2 of them, and Mr. Arrow and the captain were to sleep on deck in the companion, which had been enlarged on either side till you might almost have called it a roundhouse. Very low it was still, of course, but there was room to swing 2 hammocks, and even the mate seemed pleased with the arrangement. Even he, perhaps, had been doubtful as to the crew, but that is only guess, for, as you shall hear, we had not long the benefit of his opinion. We were all hard at work changing the powder in the berths, when the last man or 2, and Long John along with them, came off in a shore boat. The cook came up the side like a monkey for cleverness, and as soon as he saw what was doing, "So ho, mates," said he. "What's this?" "We're a-changing the powder, Jack," answers one. "Why, by the powers," cried Long John, "if we do, we'll miss the morning tide." "My orders," said the captain shortly. "You may go below, my man. Hands will want supper." "Aye, aye, sir," answered the cook, and touching his forelock, he disappeared at once in the direction of his galley. "That's a good man, captain," said the doctor. "Very likely, sir," replied Captain Smollett. "Easy with that, men, easy." He ran on to the fellows who were shifting the powder, and then, suddenly observing me examining the swivel we carried amidships, a long brass 9, "Here you, ship's boy," he cried, "out of that. Off with you to the cook and get some work." And then, as I was hurrying off, I heard him say quite loudly to the doctor, "I'll have no favourites on my ship. I assure you I was quite of the squire's way of thinking, and hated the captain deeply.
All right, so we have met Long John. We have watched Long John do a masterful job of acting, I think. My assumption was that when Pew ran out of the tavern, Long John absolutely knew who Pew was, and the guys who ran after him didn't so much run as walk away from any windows and then stand there whistling until they could come back in and say they couldn't catch Pew. That's just the image I got in my head. I don't know if you have a different read on it. You're certainly welcome to. And you can share it with everybody. Heather@craftlit.com or 206-350-1642. But yeah, Long John, wow. He's a fun guy. And he seems really pleasant. And he likes Jim, and we like Jim. So again, if we had never heard of Long John Silver before, I don't think I would have had any bad guy bells ringing right now. Would you? He doesn't even seem particularly perturbed about watching the guns and the powder being moved back under the cabin, back to the back part of the ship where the captain is. I don't know. He seems like a nice guy. And then there's Captain Smollett. Captain Smollett, brusque, abrupt, clear-headed, clear-spoken, simple, straightforward speech. Something that Squire Trelawney will absolutely never listen to. He's too much of a romantic and too much of a goofball, and in many ways, a lot younger than Jim, even. He seems just kind of childish in his outlook. And the things that the captain says are troublesome to him. Not that he's going to go so far out on a limb or out on a plank as to say that there's reason to fear a mutiny. He doesn't seem like somebody who would ever scream fire in a crowded theater. Even if there was a fire, he would simply start directing people quietly but insistently towards the exits. He's clearly concerned, and all of the reasons that he gives for being concerned are pretty important, it seems to me. And that's where it's the one time so far that Dr. Livesey exposes his amateur state in the sailing world. For him to say at the end of the captain's laundry list of concerns that it's the mountain and the mouse, it's a lot of noise for no big effect. I think even Livesey is missing the point. For Smollett to have come forward with any complaints at all, and to have walked in expecting to be fired, which is what it seemed like to me, that he was just expecting Squire Trelawney to say, off with you. I think a guy like Captain Smollett, he's not going to say anything unless it's dire. He seems like a guy who just takes care of business. He does what needs to be done. He knows his way around. He is totally in charge, and he is absolutely the guy who I would want sailing a ship were I to go off to find treasure. His laundry list of things that are concerning to him are, I think, both massive and super dangerous. There are guys on the ship who know the longitude and latitude to which they are sailing, but the captain doesn't. I don't even know how you pull that off. How do you navigate if you don't know where you're going? So there's that. Everybody knows that they're going for treasure. And then for Squire Trelawney to blame Livesey and Jim, people who haven't even been there yet long enough, to have been the ones who divulged the coordinates to everybody and their brother. I loved that somebody talked to the parrot. Was the way he gets it across. It's like the one kind of colloquial thing that we get to hear the captain say. And I think it is a lovely way to make it clear that somebody's been blabbing, because once you tell it to the parrot's going to tell it to everybody who can be within earshot of the parrot. But I also thought it was important for us to note and reinforce that Jim believes Trelawney. He believes that Squire Trelawney is not the one responsible for spilling the beans and telling everybody about the treasure, and specifically that Trelawney didn't tell everyone the coordinates. And I don't mean that I expect, or in my mind's eye, I don't see Squire Trelawney walk around and go, "Hey, everybody, guess where we're sailing to?" and then blurt out the coordinates in the middle of a pub. In my mind's eye, he is, cozying up to people and speaking in hushed tones about how extremely cool this voyage is going to be and where exactly they're going to go. Because to him, it makes him sound like he's all that and a slice of bread, instead of somebody who's actively putting all of them in some amount of peril. And again, I think it is really lovely writing on Robert Louis Stevenson's part that at the end of the chapter, Dr. Livesey says the two honest men that Trelawney appears to have gotten together, though Dr. Livesey never thought he'd managed to accomplish any honest, honorable men, he thinks the two most trustworthy are the captain and Long John Silver. And that sets us up beautifully for the next chunk. All right, that's it for me. Have a great one. I'll talk to you soon. Bye. If you like what you heard, please leave us a review at iTunes or like us on Facebook or follow us on Twitter or any one of a million different places that Craftlit wound up over the last 13 years. For more information on Craftlit, you can visit craftlit.com and subscribe via your favorite podcast app or download the Craftlit app so you can get all of your episodes right there in your hand, all in one place without having to hassle with anything else. So you can be sure not to miss any of Treasure Island. And remember, if your hands are too busy to pick up a book, at least you can turn one on. Thanks.